Today we're going to learn about some of the principles of rhythm that exist in all kinds of contemporary music, but also the unique discoveries that Renaissance poets made in terms of dealing with rhythm in a very sophisticated, interesting way. So the first thing that we need to think about is, how does rhythm in music work? Well, generally in music, we see that if it's good, there's a rhythm that varies with something that doesn't. There's that underlying beat that is pretty stable, and there's something across the top that changes constantly. So in the example of rap, we have a rap beat, and then we have the vocals that go on the top of it. So something that doesn't vary very much, and then something that is constantly changing. Now you need both of them to make good music. If you have just one or the other, it's not all that interesting. For example, if you have just the instrumentals, we can listen to part of Eminem's Lose Yourself. So I think most of us would agree that that's a pretty great underlying beat, but it's not something necessarily that you'd actually want to listen to. Even if you're just working out or driving, you'd probably want something a little bit more interesting than that. At the same time, you also probably don't want to listen to just the vocals. Here's an example of just vocals without the underlying beat.
Lose yourself in the music the moment you own it. You better never let it go. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better lose yourself in the music the moment you own it. As we move toward a new world order, a normal life is boring. The superstardom's close to postmortem. It only grows harder, homie grows hotter. He blows, it's all over. These hoes is all on him. Coast to coast shows, he's known as the Globetrotter.
So once again, even though this is one of the most famous rap songs of all time and it's skillfully done, it's really not that interesting unless we have the underlying beat. So the variation without the beat doesn't work well, and the beat without the variation doesn't work well. So it's kind of, we need both of these. Now, of course, if we had put both of them together,
Opportunity. Better go capture this moment and hope it don't do it. Gravity knows his whole back to these ropes. It don't matter, he's dope. He knows that, but he's broke.
so notice that there's the underlying beat, and then there's the rhythm across the top, and they work well together. Now, so the example from rap, and let's do an example from Hamilton, the musical. This is from the opening song, Alexander Hamilton. Now I want you to listen and notice that in the beginning, the vocals don't change very much. And then as the song continues, they start to vary more and more. So at the very beginning, the vocals are pretty much exactly in line with the beats. And it stays very, very, very similar. After that, it changes.
How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar, the $10 founding father without a father?
So once again, if you listen to that very first, how does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, you see a really kind of boom, 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 with a little bit of variation. But then by the time you get to 10 seconds in, we see a lot of variation.
Son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of a forgotten.
So right when we get in the middle of a forgotten, then we're kind of off and running. So if you can imagine a rap song in which it just kind of stayed with that initial beat and didn't vary, it wouldn't be that interesting, right? So if we had something that, an unvarying beat with a varying lyrics, but the lyrics were just in line, it wouldn't be all that entertaining. But fortunately for us, Lin-Manuel Miranda was a masterful lyricist and is able to create things with there's that underlying beat and then the variation on top. And we see this kind of principle in all kinds of different domains. Someone that wears the same suit every day, but maybe varies the tie or the color of the shirt. We see this in pizza. toppings in sandwiches and iPhone covers, etc. Something that's underlying, that's going to be the same, and then something that varies, that's going to be on top. Now, poetry is a type of music, and not everyone would agree with that initially. But I would say, we can say obviously poetry has rhythm, right? Um, and I would also argue that poetry has certain melodies and harmonies built in. So you might say, well, poetry really isn't music. I would say it is, it's just sheet music. And it doesn't really become music until you speak it out loud, because all poetry is probably meant to be read out loud. So if you think of poetry not as a static thing on the page, but as something that's meant to come alive, and it's actually sheet music, that'll change how you look at it. Now, I think everyone would agree that poetry has rhythm, but does it really have melody? Does it really have kind of pitch and different types of sounds? Well, say this statement with me: if you are absolutely sure. Now, if I change this, you'll say, if you are absolutely sure. And notice how the pitch of your voice changes after sure. And so even while the pitch doesn't vary as much as it does if you're singing a song in which there's greater variation, we're actually constantly, at all times, varying the pitch of our voice in subtle ways to get across our points, to get across what is happening. So even while the music of poetry is a little bit subtler, maybe a little bit narrow than kind of music that you listen to on a pop song or something like that, there very much is music happening. So for example, listen to the phrase, permit me to give you a permit. Now, the two PERMIT words are actually subtly different, right? In one, we see permit me to give you a permit. Notice that there's a little bit more emphasis put on the permit, the PER, and a little less influence put on the mit part. And the beginning, permit, we see a little bit more emphasis on the mit part and a little less emphasis on the per. And so there's a little change in accent. And the accent is partially by the force that I'm using, or partially by the loudness. But sometimes when you use these accents, it's also with the pitch. So permit me to give you a permit. So you can hear that little change, permit me to give you a permit. So English poets figured out how to create a beat with the words themselves. And they did this by using those kinds of natural stresses or accents. So this is called meter. So a stress or an accent is just how much emphasis is placed on an individual syllable. Not just a word, because a word can have multiple parts or multiple syllables, but on the syllable itself. So let's look at the example, the difference between bacon and massage. Bacon, the emphasis is on the first syllable, the bake part, and then the bacon comes down a little bit. Whereas with massage, we hear less emphasis on the beginning, the ma, and then a much bigger emphasis on the saj. Bacon versus massage. If we reverse this stress, we get bacon and massage. And we can hear that it sounds a little bit off. Now, if you are skillfully place words just right, what you can end up doing is you can create accents every other syllable. So the first accent will not have, or the first syllable will not have an accent, the next syllable will. And so you'll kind of have this bump, 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 bump rhythm. If you place words just right. So if you are careful, you create a line that has a stress on every other beat. And this creates a rhythm that will make impressive poems that others will like. So if you just be careful about where you place words, you can create bump, 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 bump. And so this is what English Renaissance poets did. But they had different strategies on how they did that. So some of them made sure each syllable worked perfectly, but in order to do that, they messed up the language. For example, if they wanted to end on a stress, because a lot of the lines would end bum 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 bum. Well, if you want to end on the word mother, then you have to say mother, which is not how that word is usually used. So instead of saying my mother, which is naturally how they'd say, they would say something like mother mine. And then it kind of fit the rhythm or the meter, but it didn't really make sense because nobody actually says mother mine. There are other poets though, and they made sure the words always created the right rhythm without messing up the language. Then there were some other Renaissance poets that kind of followed the meter, but often broke the rhythm. But there's a fourth kind of Renaissance poet, and this was something that this guy named Sir Philip Sidney really came up with, and a lot of people imitated him. And he did this brilliant job, and he figured out something that was extremely clever. What he did, and what many others after him did, is created lines that could do two things at once. So they created lines of poetry that were both the underlying beat and the different vocal rhythm at the same time. So if you think of somebody, some of you guys have seen those people that can beatbox while hum a tune at the same time, they're kind of doing the poetry equivalent of that. They're creating simultaneous rhythms in a single line. So these lines are, if you want to extend the metaphor, both the rap beat itself and the rap lyrics over the top. So they're doing the same on the both. So it's like a single line of sheet music in which the same thing is telling you two different ways of relating to it. So there's the unvarying part of it and the varying part of it. You might be wondering, how is this possible? Exactly what is happening? How can you create lines that could do two things at once? Lines that could simultaneously kind of be straightforward, but then also have all this variation over the top, stability and variation simultaneously. So let's show an example, because they really created music, two things that could happen together. So here's a great example of this. The line, "When to the sessions of sweet silent thought." So on one hand, you can read it according to that kind of classic bump, 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 bump pattern or meter. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought. So I put the red kind of as the accented. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought. And then you get the varying section. Because if you read this line a different way, as you might just read it naturally without knowing it was poetry, you'll find that you put accents in a different way. So when I do that, I get when to the sessions of sweet silent thought. And so on one level, this line of poetry is kind of giving you the bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, bum bum. But on another level, it's giving you bum, 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 bum. So we're getting two rhythms that are happening simultaneously in one line. So once again, that's music. That's multiple parts. That's variation and stability happening together. It's lines that could do two things at once. Lines that could be read in the varying meter, but also could be read as varying. So a good reader, you might imagine a good reader reading one of these lines, they might be able to hear the underlying beat in their head and the sound of the words over the top, like a rap. So they might be actually able to hear both happening at the same time. Now, not everybody maybe could do that, but if you were familiar with poetry and you understood what's happening, you could say, oh, this line can be read, bum, 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 but I can also read it naturally, and underneath I'm actually kind of listening to that beat happening at the same time. So here's an example by this guy named Fulk Revel, who is around at the time and was close friends and did a lot of experimenting in poetry with Sir Philip Sidney, who kind of pioneered these lines. So we can listen to these lines and you can hear that most of them can be kind of read according to the kind of very strict meter. You that seek what life is in death, now find it air that once was breath, new names unknown, old names gone till time and bodies but souls none, redur, then make time while you be but steps to your eternity. If you read it that way, it kind of works, but it's not that interesting. But you can also, while hearing that underlying beat, you that seek what life is in death, you can do you that seek what life is in death, now find it air that once was breath, new names unknown, old names gone, till time and bodies but souls none. Reader, then make time while you be, but steps to your eternity. So you hear that, how that happens? So it's by creating these lines that can fit that meter, they're kind of telling you that there is a beat. And then by creating lines that can be read a different way, they're saying, but you don't actually have to listen to that beat. So basically what they're doing is in single lines, they're creating what might be considered a rap song. So I think that first line is a great example. You that seek what life is in death, bum, 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 bum. But at the same time, you can hear the underlying meter. So instead of you that seek what life is in death, you that seek what life is in death. Okay, so it's basically Hamilton. It's just Hamilton written a long time ago before they had recordings. So instead of doing recordings, they wrote sheet music of poems where you could actually do both simultaneously. So that's a little bit about kind of the renaissance of rhythm that happened all happened in the late 1500s, early 1600s. If you want to learn a lot more about this, there's this great book called The Founding of English Meter by John Thompson. And it kind of walks through all the different strategies that these various poets used in order to try to create the most interesting, effective rhythms. And I hope as you read different poems, especially poems that are written in meter, old poems, kind of go bum, 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 you'll begin to hear that underlying beat, but also hear how sometimes on the top you can create variation.